Good morning, my ECO 3311 students. As you're all aware, this course is hybrid, and as is stated on your Texas State University website, we are going to be meeting on Zoom, live on Zoom, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Friday. The other 2 days, which is Tuesdays and Thursday, I will still be recording lectures anyway at Zoom and uploading the videos just like I did yesterday. Yesterday we almost completed chapter 19, which is a short chapter on the money demand, money supply, and we talked about the Keynesian framework. We talked about the classical quantity theory. We derived the money demand function according to the classical theory. And then we show a model of inflation equation that explain how changes in money supply and changes in real GDP can drive inflation in the economy. Let me share my screen and let's complete the about 2-3 slides remaining. So once we complete this chapter, then I'm going to start on the chapter on time value of money, which is chapter 4. So you might want to start having your financial calculator ready or any regular scientific calculator. Okay, so let me share my screen and we'll talk about it on the other side. So here's a continuation of chapter 19. Okay. So yeah, again, yesterday, so we started talking about the Keynesian framework. So we argued that John Maynard Keynes wrote a book in 1936. So chapters of that book, some of the chapters of the book are dedicated to understanding the theory of money demand. So the starting point in Keynesian conjectures is that, first of all, the Keynesian money demand theory is also known as the Keynes liquidity preference theory. We coined the name liquidity preference because money is the most liquid asset. So we call it Keynes liquidity preference theory, or you can say the theory for money, the money demand theory. You can call it the money demand theory. Okay. So Keynes began by asking a question: why do people keep money? Why do people hold money? Like if I meet with you and I find you, like let's say you have $200 in your pocket, in your wallet, you're most likely going to tell me that, oh, I've got this $200. I'm actually going to the store to do some shopping. I'm going to the mall and I'm going to HEB to do grocery. I'm going to Walmart, Target, whatever it is. So Keynes argued that one of the first motive of money is what we're calling the transaction motive. People are going to hold money or they're going to demand money because they want to go shopping. They want to go buy something with it. They're going to carry out some transaction. So that's money. One of the motives why people are holding money. They're going to buy something with it. And then the second motive why people hold money is for precautionary purposes. You may want to set some money aside just to take care of the unexpected, some unexpected events that could happen to you in your family. Maybe somebody gets sick, or maybe you need to set some money aside. Maybe you take care of unexpected decrease in the price level in the store. You can take advantage of when prices of electronics are falling during Black Friday. You don't want to invest all your money in stocks, because then you don't have ready cash to take advantage of what lower prices during holiday season. So people set some money aside because of those unexpected decrease in price level in the economy, or just taking care of the unexpected scenarios, maybe events that might happen to their families where they want to put some money aside to take care of it. And then the last purpose is the speculative motive. Remember, the money that you hold or the money that you demand, money demand and money holding, it means the same thing. So the amount of money that you are holding, which is outside of the banking system, is what we are calling money demand or money holding. That money does not pay you any interest. If you keep $1,000 under the mattress at home from January 1, 2025 through December 31, 2025, it is going to still be $1,000. Money at home does not earn you any interest, or in your wallet or in your purse. So sometimes people hold money because they're going to use that money to buy assets that actually hold them a rate that can pay them a return. Maybe they're going to buy stocks, they're going to buy bonds, they're going to buy real estate, they're going to open some savings deposit which earn them interest, or CDs or mutual fund investments. So these are the variety of assets that earn you a return. So anytime you're holding money, is for speculative motive. Some people are going to use that money to buy those assets that earn them a rate of return. So that's money being used for speculative purpose. And Keynes is going to argue that all these motives of money, the money that you set aside for transaction purposes, for precautionary motive, for speculative purposes, all this depends on what? Depend positively on income, or you can also call real GDP. Okay, so if the income in the economy is doing well, it means people have high income. People are going to demand money for all these motives. They're going to, because they have it in the first place. When the economy is weak, we have low GDP, people, Americans don't have money, then we're going to demand less money for these purposes. Okay, so money demand, whether you're demanding money for transaction motive, for precautionary motive, or for speculative motive, they all positively depend on the real income. And then the money demand also depend on what? Also depends on depends negatively on interest rate. Because remember, the money that you're demanding or you're holding is outside of the banking system. So I want you to think critical about it. And we're going to define that interest rate. That's a nominal interest rate, I. So the key idea here is that when banks are paying very high rate of return on different investments, like on savings account, on CDs, or they say the bond market is paying very high interest rate, people are going to hold less money, because the more money you're holding the more money you'll be losing in foregone interest. If you had put that money in a savings account, it would have earned you maybe $200 more if the interest rate was 20%. Okay, so people are gonna think critically when they see interest rates rising in the economy. They're gonna hold less money. They're gonna invest their money in some interest-bearing accounts that earn them a return. So the amount of money that we are demanding, whether for transaction motive or precautionary or speculative, is gonna be negatively correlated with interest rate, nominal interest rate. Okay. And then, but Keynes also going to argue later that the money demand might also depend on what, and other economists also recognize this later. It might depend on the payment technology. Okay, I want you to think about before 1973. Remember, the first ATM machine was invented in 1973, meaning that before 1973, if you wanted money, you wanted cash, because there were no debit cards. There are no credit cards. There are no ATMs. So anytime you needed money, it required your physical presence at your bank location. You need to go and line up and fill up this cashier form. And then, you give it to the cashier. They look up your account on the computer. And then you tell the cashier how much you want to withdraw. Then the cashier is going to dispense cash and give it to you. So now think about it. If you live, like, say, 60 miles away from your bank location, and you want to withdraw just $100 or $50, you need to drive somehow 60 miles away from your home just to go and withdraw money. And the funny thing is, most banks only open Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. And that could be the time that you may be working. Okay. So because the payment technology was very lousy, was not modernized back then when we did not have the ATM. Anytime an American would go to the bank to withdraw money, they would withdraw a large sum of money to bring it home, because they don't want the inconvenience of going back and forth, going to the bank. Okay, so Keynes is arguing that if this technology is very lousy, very underdeveloped technology, like lack of ATM machines, the demand for money tend to be high. But with modern technology, where we have ATM machines everywhere, you don't need to demand a lot of money. You don't need to withdraw a lot of money and bring home. You can just withdraw a little, because it's very convenient to withdraw money. ATM machines are everywhere now. Okay, so the payment technology can influence how much money people want to hold. And then one thing I want to talk about, Keynes distinguishes between real versus nominal quantities of money. So when we're going to define M is going to be the nominal money supply. Nominal money supply. So this is going to be in dollars. Nominal money supply is in dollars. Okay, the total stock of dollars that exists in the United States at a point in time. It could be $4 or $5 trillion. That's nominal money. It's in dollars. But if you ask yourself, how much the quantity of GDP that our dollars can buy us, okay, that's going to be called real money supply. So if I divide M by P, let's say the average prices of all goods and services in America is 1,000. So if you divide the total stock of dollars that exists in the economy by $1,000, this is going to give you what we call the real money supply. It's no longer in dollars. The real money is in terms of what? Terms of actual quantities of GDP, which our money can buy us. Okay. All right. So that's going to be very important. So I'm going to go ahead and write. So now, in the classical model that we talked about yesterday, classicals assume that what? That the money does not depend on interest rate. That's the assumption they make there. Okay. So, but Keynes is going to assume that the money demand. So when you write MD over P, this is real money demand, is going to be depending on two things. It's a function of interest rate and real GDP or real income. Okay. So, and money demand is negatively depend on interest rate. I already talked about that, but positively depends on income or real GDP. Okay. So if you illustrate this, because interest rate is a price of money, if you draw a graph, you put interest rate on this axis. When you draw supply and demand, interest rate goes on the vertical axis. And then on the horizontal axis, we're going to put quantity of money. Okay. Okay. So the demand for money is downward sloping. You can call this money demand, real money demand. And as what I'm saying here is that is, if interest rate is I1, people are going to demand this much quantity of what? For money. When interest rate falls, say, to I2, okay, people demand more money. So there's a negative relationship between interest rate and what? And the demand for dollars in the economy. Okay. So now, in the classical model that we saw yesterday, in the quantity equation, we derived the money demand function. So this is Keynes. In the classical model, remember, which we saw yesterday, the real money demand, MD over P, was equal to little k and y. And velocity was constant in the classical model. Okay, we talked about that. But in the Keynesian model, money supply, so money demand depends on two things, depend on interest rate and income. Here, you don't see interest rate in the classical money demand function because classicals assume that interest rate does not affect the money demand, which is kind of naive when you think about it. So when Keynes built this model, he put back interest rate in the model so that, that there's additional factor, and when this function is written in a much more general form. I can write a specific functional form of this function. You could think about it this way. Someone could say maybe money demand MD over P maybe equals to 5y minus 100i. See, this is much more in more specific functional form. You see, there's a negative sign for this function on what? On the coefficient on I, meaning that there's a negative relationship between interest rate and money demand. But there's a positive coefficient 5 on income, y, meaning that there's a positive relationship between what? In real GDP and money demand. That's what we talked about. So it is a more specific functional form. Okay, so remember in the classical model we talked about yesterday, velocity was constant. Velocity is no longer going to be constant in this Keynesian model. And I want to show you why velocity is not constant. Okay. So if you have MD over P is a function of I and Y. I can do some algebra here. Say, let's take the inverse. Take the inverse of both sides of an equation. What you have done on the left, you must do it on the right. Take the inverse of both sides of this equation. What do I mean by taking the inverse? You know, if you have something like x equals to y, and I tell you to take the inverse, that means 1 over x equals to 1 over y. That's what I mean by taking. So if I take the inverse of the left-hand side, that's going to be written as P over MD. And the inverse of the right-hand side is going to be 1 over F IY. Okay? And then the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to say, from this expression, I'll say multiply. Let's multiply both sides by y. If I multiply both sides by y, you're going to get py over md on the left must equal to y over f iy. Okay? But then remember, in equilibrium, the money market reaches equilibrium when what? When money demand equals to money supply. So where there's money, so when we invoke the equilibrium condition, this MD is the same thing as M. When the money market reaches equilibrium, demand for dollars equals to supply for dollars. So then we can write this expression as PY. Instead of writing MD, we just replace that by M, because in equilibrium, money demand equals to money supply equals to Y over F of what? IY. Okay? So what is this on the left-hand side? What is PY divided by M? We talked about that yesterday. That is velocity, because remember, from the quantity equation, so if you go back here, let's go back here. Okay, from the quantity equation, remember, we know that what? We know that MV equals to PY. We saw that yesterday. So if I divide both sides by M, see? So velocity equals to PY over M. So you have recovered velocity, even though you didn't see velocity in the whatever. So this is velocity. So that means our velocity can be written on this. It's here on the slide. It's going to be PY. So velocity is no longer be constant. Velocity is not constant in the Keynesian model. It depends on interest rate and real GDP. Okay, now I want to be very clear here. What is the relationship between velocity then V and FIY here? Okay, remember, interest rate is entering this function, and we're saying that this function here, this is no, I want to go back. Because you know that MD over P, money demand function, equals to F of IY. So when we say that an interest rate goes up, there's a negative relationship between interest rate and the money demand. So this entire function is your money demand. So when interest rate goes up, it means that the money demand is gonna fall. So when interest rate goes up, this inside this bracket, it means that the entire function here is going to decrease, because there's a negative relationship between interest rate and the money demand function. The money demand function is FIY. So if I goes up inside this function, this entire function is gonna fall. And when the entire function is at the denominator, that means this entire ratio is going to what? Is going to increase. So what does that mean? That means when interest rate goes up, when I goes up, increases, that is going to lead to this entire function, IY, this is going to fall. And that is going to lead to the entire Y over ratio, Y over F, IY, is going to go up. Meaning that interest, but this entire Y over Fy, that is velocity, meaning that there's a positive relationship between velocity and interest rate. So velocity is no longer constant, the way the classical model was telling us yesterday. Under the Keynesian framework, velocity is procyclical to interest rate. In fact, the procyclical movements in velocity in interest rates will induce procyclical movement in velocity. So velocity will change as expectation about future normal interest rates also change. Okay. All right. And then let's talk a little bit more again. So there's what we call Keynes put together what we call a portfolio theory of money demand. So this is a theory of portfolio choice and Keynesian liquidity preference. The theory of portfolio choice can justify the conclusion from Keynesian liquidity preference function that the demand for real money balance is positively related to income and negatively related to the nominal interest rate. And other factors that affect the demand for money, according to Keynes, are going to be things like wealth, the risk factors, liquidity of other assets. So if people are more wealthy, they're most likely going to demand more dollars. So there's a positive relationship between money demand and wealth. What about risk? Okay. So you could think about risk in two ways. Okay. Inflation risk. If you're holding money, you face if there's inflation in the economy, your money is going to lose value. Okay, so the demand for money can be related to its own risk. Holding money can have its own risk that when there's inflation, the purchasing power of your dollars go down. Think about it. If you have $100 today and lunch is $10, that means that $100 can buy you 10 lunches. If you continue holding that $100, let's say next year, and let's say next year prices went up to $20, that means your money is going to be worth less next year in terms of what it can buy. So people are going to demand less money if they hold less dollars if they know there's inflation coming up in the economy. So there's inflation risk, But risk can also be in terms of the risk of other assets out there. Like if the stock market become more riskier, people hold on to their money. The demand for money is going to go up when assets that annual rate of return like stocks, bonds, real estate become risky. Okay. So you could think of, and then liquidity of other assets. Okay. People want to, when an asset is not, liquidity basically is how easy an asset can be converted into one form to another, or can be converted into cash. People always want to buy assets where they can get rid of. Nobody wants to buy an asset where you cannot liquidate if you want to sell it. So the idea here is that when other assets out there are not very liquid, when you buy an asset like a house, real estate, let's say you buy a house in the middle of nowhere in Alaska, and someday you may want to sell that house. If you cannot easily sell that house, then we say that that house is what? That house is less liquid. So people don't want to buy something that is less liquid. They're going to hold on their money. So the higher the liquidity of an asset, the higher is the demand for what? The lower is the demand for money. And the lower the liquidity of an asset, the higher is the demand for money. So there's a negative correlation between liquidity and what? And the demand for money. So we can now summarize all the factors that we have discussed that affect the demand for money. Remember, the most important one is going to be interest rate. And interest rate is negative. So when interest rate goes up, see when the hour is ticking up, the money demand falls because we say there's a negative what? Negative relationship between money demand and interest rate. Because interest rate is the opportunity cost of holding money. What you must give up in terms of foregone interest when you choose to hold money. But there's a positive relationship between real GDP, real income, and money demand. When income is going up, people demand more dollars. They were talking about payment technology. With inventions of ATM machine, electronic money transfers, e-cash, better technology means people hold less money. So the demand for money is going to fall when technology improves. Meaning that if with lousy technology, people hold a lot of money. And then wealth is possible to correlate with money. If people are more wealthy, you hold more money because they have it in the first place. When you're less wealthy, you don't hold a lot of money because you don't have it in the first place. All right. So the riskiness of other assets. So when other assets like bonds become risky, let somebody tells you there's a 60% chance that the bond and stock market is going to collapse. That means the stock and bond market are becoming very risky. Then people are going to hold what? Hold on to their money. The demand for money is going to go up. Okay. And then inflation risk. Inflation risk will affect, it can reduce the purchasing power of your money. I talked about it. When we think inflation is coming up, that means if you have $100, the $100 is going to buy you less goods and services. So people are going to get rid of their money if they fear that inflation is coming, because inflation reduces the purchasing power. You better buy something that holds value, maybe gold, maybe you can invest in stocks, maybe buy a house or something like that, or buy livestock. Okay. And then liquidity of other assets. When assets are more liquid, people demand less money because they're buying them. The demand for assets that are liquid is always high, so people want to buy more liquid assets. That means they're going to be holding to less money. So there's a negative correlation between the two. Okay, so I talked about this already. I'm not going to repeat that. The relationship between the precautionary demand for money and what and income, and as well as interest rate. So we're going to end here. The last slide here, you can skip it because this is about testing the stability of the money demand function. Right? How stable is the money demand? We need data here. We're not using data here. We're using just theory class. Okay. So that concludes my discussion of chapter 19, which is a chapter on the what? Money demand, money supply. So the most important takeaways from this chapter, please understand that equation of exchange, which we talked about, MV equals to PY. Explain how there's a one-to-one relationship between money supply and price level when velocity is constant and the economy is at full employment. We talked about that. And then deriving the money demand function from the quantity equation. And then we use that quantity equation to derive the model for inflation yesterday. And then now we talked about the Keynesian framework, Keynesian money demand function, which incorporates interest rate into the model and assume that velocity is no longer constant. In the Keynesian model, velocity is induced by changes in interest rates. Okay. Thank you so much. So now I'm going to be switching this segment of this recording. I'm going to switch off, then I'm going to come back and record the lecture, chapter 4 lectures. Make sure you watch these videos. I'm going to be assigning some homework assignment maybe today. They may be due on Thursday night. So watch out for those assignments.